So today's feast, in which we honour the grandparents of our Lord, the parents of our Blessed Lady, Saints Joachim and Saint Anne, is a feast about which we really can say next to nothing, because we know very little in the way of historical fact about these two individuals. We know, of course, they existed because Our Lady had parents, but we don't know much about their lifestyle nor about their history. Except a few facts that sacred tradition hands down to us. What they do offer us for our reflection, however, is among other things, the virtue of hope. Because from the very beginning of what we know of Saints Joachim and Anne is the story of God working his marvels for those he had chosen despite human difficulty. The story begins that St. Anne was barren, that she couldn't bear children, and that God worked a miracle in her in granting her a child who was to be the mother of his son. We know little about Our Lady's life at home. The main thing we know is that but a few years later, when she was in her perhaps mid-teens, there in the house of Saints Joachim and St. Anne, the angel Gabriel came to her to tell her of her particular place in God's plan of salvation. Now, the unfolding of all of that plan involved, of course, St. Anne and St. Joachim having a normal human relationship with their daughter, and probably subsequently, we don't know what age they were when they died, but it'd be nice to imagine that they were old enough to know our Lord, that they knew their grandchild Jesus, and in that they had a normal grandparent relationship with him, which probably involved, more than anything else, much the same for most grandparents, endless worry. Because if we think about it in very normal terms, the parents of the Blessed Virgin Mary knew nothing about her particular role, of course. They might have known that there was something special about their child, but they didn't know what that would mean. And then they had to worry about who she was going to marry. And then they might have found out about this controversy about her becoming pregnant and not quite sure what had gone on there. And then off they went to Bethlehem for the birth of the child, and the worry about where Mary would give birth, and the lack of material means that they had in order to support themselves. And then they had to go off to a foreign country to escape Herod, and all the time Joachim and Anne probably pretty frantic, concerned about what would become of their daughter and her husband, and perhaps more importantly, what would happen to their grandson. In the midst of all of this, though, we know that God was working, and that for Joachim and Anne, there was never any hopeless situation. There was always hope, because they knew that whatever God's plan was, he was bringing it to fulfillment, that despite what they failed to understand, or what they might have questioned God about, why he was allowing certain things to happen, or why things couldn't be more straightforward, he was still at work. And perhaps that can offer us means for us to have a firm faith and hope in God in the midst of our own lives, particularly when it comes to our own, sometimes, I'm sure, anxiety and concern about family and friends who we know are experiencing things that perhaps aren't quite straightforward, and perhaps in their own relationship with God seem to be struggling in that relationship, or making choices which are taking them away from God. And I'm sure parents and grandparents here today know that anxiety for certain of their children or grandchildren as they see them make their decisions in life and are uncertain how things will pan out. We turn to God in the midst of all this and know that he is still at work. If I think of my own background, my grandfather was the Catholic. He divorced and then remarried and married my grandmother. She wasn't a Catholic. They weren't allowed to get married in church. She wasn't allowed to become a Catholic until he died. She obviously wasn't too pleased when, after the burial, the priest said, "Oh, you can become a Catholic now." So she didn't become a Catholic for many years. They had several children together. All of them lapsed. I was baptized as a child, never stepped foot again in a church for another 15 years, and now I'm a priest. So God works in all kinds of different extraordinary circumstances. We don't know how his grace is working in our lives and what he will do in the future. But together with Saints Joachim and Anne, and together with all those who have gone before us, we know that he is at work, and our hope is firmly founded because it is founded in him, for whom nothing is impossible.